recording it? Wonderful. All right, it is 5:01. The Town of Paonia Advisory Water Committee meeting of June 30th is called to order. All the members are here. Corinne Ferguson is here. So we have Thomas Markle, Philip Sirianni, Michael Drake, me, your chair, Tammy Mick. We have one member in the audience, member of the public. So, first rule of order is the approval of the draft minutes from June 16th, 2021. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make a motion. Mike Drake, I'll make a motion to approve.
No, we can bring another one over there
Sure.
too. Okay, and that was a second? Okay, the only thing I had was at 5:34, because Aurora plant is offline. Is that just a misprint? I think it's just supposed to be the 1 million clock plant. Okay. Does that look right? We don't have another plant, so. Oh, it is the clock plant. So, other than that, I'm good with it. Any other questions about the minutes? Oh, I also, oh, never mind. Nope, I corrected that. Okay. Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes? Say aye.
Aye.
Okay, and no nays? All right, next order of business is approval of the agenda. We just have one item, but I think it can be fairly broadly discussed, including the legal opinion of the decrees and any financial or anything. I think all of that is encompassed in the first agenda item. So let's get started. How about Thomas? You want? Oh,
I'd like to
yes.
add an item. Can I add?
Please do.
I'd like to add a discussion on the addition to full-time staff and how we might help that with some interesting ideas I've been thinking about. Yeah, I'd make that motion to add to the agenda.
So a motion to add to the agenda a discussion of addition of staff to the Public Works, to the Water Committee, or?
Yes, that's good.
Okay, to the Public Works.
Second.
Any further discussion? Do we want to discuss that before or after we discuss the draft recommendations? Do you want to attack that first, or do you want to?
Either way, I can do it.
Okay, let's do it then.
At the town hall meeting the other night, I had suggested that, and in agreement with the JD Hydro Plan and others, that the town is below the number of full-time equivalents for companies, water utilities of our size. And I've been thinking about how we might assist that other than, and how we might go about that. I had a rather lengthy discussion today with Brent Bear, who's the engineer that's done the inventory for our system. And one of the things that was brought up was the fact that we have a town attorney, but we do not have a town engineer, I don't believe. Well, one of the problems that we're going to be faced with, I think, is that we have some grant money out there to spend, and I think I'm of the opinion we should be applying for other grants as well. One of the issues is that every time we want to do a project in Paonia, we have to go find an engineer in most cases, or if it's been pre-engineered, to do the work. There's going to be a lot of infrastructure work being done in the next couple of years, it looks like. We have some money, and I think what I got from the council the other night, there appears to be some intent to do so. I think that we should make a recommendation or consider hiring a town engineer. Now, one of my, I'm not sure it's a complaint, but concerns has been that we don't have a very good master plan of any site. We tend to fix things when they break and go from there. So I'm just curious how we might, and I'll ask Corinne that, how we might go about possibly having a town engineer. It would probably usurp a lot of our requirements, whereas outsiders, I mean, like tonight, for example, we're looking to add some items to the most favorite infrastructure projects for next year. I think it would be very easy if we had a town engineer, and most of those projects could be done internally without having a lot of part-time people like some of us on this committee. Most communities our size do have a town engineer. They have a town attorney. So I'm just throwing that out as an idea. The two engineering firms, three now, JD Hydro, SGM has done our inventory survey and has a rather dense history with us in the past. And Westwater Engineering, I think, are the three. And I don't know how, if we decided to do that, would you put out a bid process, an RFP process? I'm not sure how that would happen. So I throw that out for some discussion. How about a town engineer?
So this is actually a topic that's been discussed at the board level and recently also at the Public Works Committee level. When we looked into this in 2018, I believe, during the budget process, it may have been 2019, during the budgeting process, we reached out and basically the engineering firms, specifically Westwater and SGM were the ones we spoke to. They said, basically you just do a contract agreement with them, you get a discount on their hourly sheet, on their price sheet, but what it really offers the town is having the engineer on call that you can go to and tap for any of your projects and questions, and stops the necessity to have a specific contract for each individual item that they do for you. This was something we just briefly touched on at our last committee meeting when we came together to discuss a specific item, and was something that we were going to bring back up to the board moving forward, specifically looking at the 2022 budget, because staff also agrees that it would be in our best interest to have an engineer on, I want to say on retainer, although there was not a retainer associated with the agreement.
That's great. I'm glad. I would personally heartily support that.
Corinne, was there a dollar amount or like a cost to town associated with those discussions?
There's a price sheet that they sent and said that there would be a reduction in numbers, but no specific numbers were provided.
Okay, thanks.
So is that something we want to recommend as budget season is coming up? And I'm just curious, has the town ever contracted in this manner with Westwater or SGM in the past? Or any other company?
Not that I have a record of, no.
Guess it helps if I turn it on. I know the town's been talking about it for quite a long time, because I've been around it, and they have had some engineers occasionally but they haven't done what we're suggesting that they do.
Well, as stated, I had a rather lengthy discussion with SGM, and I was interested in the inventory and particularly the map structure that I would like to look at further. I got the sense, at least from talking to them, and understand I have no allegiance to any of these people, but they have, with their inventory project that they're doing currently, I think they probably have a better understanding, possibly, than Westwater or possibly JD Hydro. The other thing is that they're a local company. They're based in Carbondale. And I would prefer to, do business on this side of the mountain as opposed to the other, just a personal observation. So, do we need would it appropriate to be a motion to recommend that that be explored? Well, if so, then I would make a motion that the Public Works Committee and the council explore the possibility of hiring a full-time town engineer.
Do we have a second on that?
Your motion is to recommend they investigate it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, motion for the Public Works Committee and/or the board to explore the possibility of hiring an engineer. Any further discussion? Any comments from the public?
I think it's a good idea. I think it might be interesting to talk to some of the local small towns around and see if they have any arrangements like this, and if they've had any experience with people they might recommend because they're happy with them.
Yeah, I think there would be a due diligence requirement on the part of any contractual obligation, which is what I think the town does currently, and it would be very similar to hiring a town attorney, which I understand is forthcoming.
And I'm just kind of wondering too if, as the town looks at hiring somebody else for a public works, how do I want to say this? Somebody to oversee the water plant and allow Travis to run the plant, if that person would be an engineer. I mean, is that making sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
And, unfortunately, Travis is not B certified. We require a B certification to run our plant. And currently, I understand, Corinne, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're outsourcing our ORC to Alan Leslie from Carbondale, and he simply, as I understand it, takes a fee, and then using what we call the Rule 100 rules and regs, he can then subordinate running of the plant to Travis. It would be nice if we had an operator internally that had a B rating, and I don't know if the town's considered that, or it seems to be a murky area. I'm an operator at sea level, so I think at some point we're going to need a B operator credential for the town.
So Mr. Leslie is still operating on the B side of the license only, because that is the area that we're deficient in with our current ORC, and not delving too deep into the specifics for the staffing, but should our ORC not be able to operate in that capacity, then I will be looking for another ORC.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm even thinking out longer term, like if we add is it possible in the future to add an engineer to the water staff that would be not only involved with the water, but would be an engineer? But I think I digress.
I'd comment, it would be glorious if we could find some 50-year-old fellow from the Front Range with wide experience, a water operator's license, and would like to move to our beautiful valley and work in our community. That would be a home run if we could find such a person.
We got to make sure that we don't discriminate on age there.
Oh, sorry. Well, I'm old, so I guess I can. Is that a
You've
personal
earned it right.
pronoun, or is that?
No, it's like a equal opportunity employer kind of a deal. Yep.
All right, so we have a motion to, direct the Public Works Committee and/or the board to explore the possibility of hiring or contracting an engineer or engineering services. All in favor?
Aye.
Well, you already got two, so even if I say no, I would like,
Okay,
I'd like
go
a
ahead.
slight modification in the way you worded that, to where we get to be involved in the looking for this people too, instead of just,
I don't think we have to add that as a modification. I think you can do that. I think we can do that.
okay.
Okay.
That was
I mean,
my-
that's-
Then yea verily, let us charge forward.
All right. I will discuss that with the other Public Works Committee member, and we will start looking into it. Okay, the draft recommendation, draft recommended prioritization list of water system projects related to JDS Hydro Water System evaluation to present to the Board of Trustees. So we had a little survey sent out to us just to get our sort of cursory opinion on what's important. Thomas, do you want to talk a little bit about the results of that?
Sure. Yeah, the topics, and I collected them from Tammy's list from our last meeting, as well as a couple other topics that we kind of glanced across but weren't listed there. And those were staffing, that is hiring additional staffing for the water system, increasing finished water storage, raw water data collection, identifying and repairing broken spring lines, shared storage and rubber reservoir, spring water transfer lines, finished water treatment and storage, PRV improvements, 8-inch steel line replacement, water loss analysis, transient analysis, rate study, master planning, SOP development, and I also solicited other ideas. And the average, basically everybody, I got 4 responses. I actually may have forgotten to do the survey myself, so I'm not going to do it now though, because it's too late. But our average response score was 8 points, right? So each topic on average got 8 points, and there were 5 topics that received more than the average. Those were staffing, that is increased staffing for the water system, got 11 points. Raw water data collection got 10. Identification and repair broken lines got 10 as well. PRV improvements got 11, and water loss analysis got 10. So it seems like our primary concerns are fixing the leaks, wherever they may be, finding out what we need to do that, and getting some help for Travis. So I think that if you want to take them in order, we already started talking about staffing, so we may as well continue that line of discussion, I think. If I don't know if anybody has any ideas regarding responsibilities or likely, I remember last meeting we learned the name of the hire for the water system who doesn't have certifications yet, but is maybe working his way towards more responsibility.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Do you think that he would be able to, like, what roles do you think he might be able to fulfill, and when?
Travis has an action item right now to provide to me a plan of action, which includes the schedule for training and duties that Mitchell will be taking on the water side and sewer side.
Okay. Is there a deadline or a time frame associated with that?
There is a deadline, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. I can tell you that it's within the next 90 days.
Okay,
But
so
because
3
there's
months.
multiple action items that we're working on that have different deadlines, but they're all within the next 90 days.
Okay. I don't know what you guys think about that.
A question for I mean, those of us that are outside the city hall throwing around ideas that you need more help. So the question is, in your little domain over there, what do you think you need?
Are we specific to water?
Yeah, water and wastewater. I mean, they're kind of together.
Yeah, so I would agree, contingent upon, circumstances over the next 60 to 90 days. One big goal is either an additional Public Works Director or an additional ad for an ORC.
Good.
So one of the things we've talked about is the grant, the ARP grant, American Rescue Plan Act grant. This is something that obviously would not be covered under that grant. This would be if there were to be a higher level person hired at a higher rate, higher pay rate, that would be something that I would assume would have to fall under next year's budget. Does that sound correct?
Dependent on the time of year and where we're at with what's been budgeted for payroll and out of those specific accounts, I would say yes. Most likely, these are things that I've presented to Finance and Personnel to include as they're starting to discuss budgetary requests moving forward for the 2022 budget.
So it sounds like several things have to happen before any decision would be made on this. Travis's test, budget. It's not something that we could just say we think you should hire somebody and the board votes on it. It's a little more complex than that.
It could definitely be a recommendation to the board, and the board could say, yes, we want you to hire, yes, we want you to budget for more staff, but we would have to look at the budget to see if that fits within 2021 or not. Uh, 2022 for sure, that would be next year's budget, but if they wanted us to move on that quicker, it would be dependent on what's available this year.
Okay, cool, thanks.
I have a question. I understand that the infrastructure money we've already received, 180,000, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So, do you, in terms, I've done a lot of project management, and that's a very large pile of money that's going to need a project manager. Could you tell us how that's going to be managed? Is Travis going to do that, or are you going to do it? Are we going to do it?
It's dependent on what the money is allocated toward. So following the last advisory water meeting and your advice that was provided at the board meeting, Travis and I did discuss what additional items we would think would fit in with this and would be priorities that we could potentially use the ARPA money for. And two of those items are first priority, it will be on the agenda for the 13th, but we budgeted in 2021 for the engineering for a valve vault, basically an altitude valve, so that we can feed water that goes to the 1 million to the 2 for multiple reasons. One, because the 2 million can serve the entire system. So we want to be able at times when necessary to feed the water, spring water that feeds directly to the 1 million into the 2. Also, it then provides us 3 million gallons basically of storage instead of 2, and knowing that within the next 18 to 24 months the town needs to reline the 2 million, we want to be able to have that 1 million as backup storage when the 2 million tank is offline, being relined. So we budgeted $20,000 in 2021, and we have an estimate for the engineering design of the valve vault anywhere from $7,500 to $10,000. So our first priority would be after it's engineered, we'll be able then to have a cost estimate to have it built and installed. So there may be a deficiency in what we have remaining in the budget for that project. So we would look at that being a first priority to get that done. The second priority would be putting some of that money toward the actual lining of the 2 million so that that can happen sooner than later.
Question, I talked to Brandon, it sounded to me, SGM is in charge of this particular project, the bypass pipe and the valving, correct?
They are the engineer that we got the estimate from.
My understanding from talking to him yesterday was that he was pretty far along on the engineering. I'm curious of the $7,500 engineering cost, is that, where does that come from?
He was far along in the assessment of what it would cost, but what he provided to me was the estimated cost of designing the valve vault contingent upon which vault was chosen, whether it was an electric actuated or an altitude valve, would be $7,500 to $10,000. They're expecting it to actually be closer to 75, but they want to give a range because surprises happen, and that will also includes the survey information that we would have to get from a surveyor.
Sure. Thank you.
I have a couple questions on those two topics. One, do we have any other current projects underway that are like water related?
Not large projects, no.
Okay. What small ones might we need to know about, aside from the list that you gave us for the 1 million gallon repairs?
They're still doing some spring line repairs. That's on the raw water side. They are, it's not specific to repairs, but they're, I believe next week is when we're scheduled to go and finish the mapping of the actual spring lines themselves. That's the only data that was not included in the GIS mapping to date. There's some small projects that Travis still would like to do this year. We're looking at replacing those last few lines that have lead connectors. The pipe themselves are not lead, but they have some tie-ins that are. Those are the ones I can think of right off the top of my head.
Okay. And of those, the valve vault, tank lining, spring line repairs, and lead connection replacements, those are not fully funded right now?
The engineer, they're all budgeted, but the altitude valve vault was only budgeted at 20,000, and approximately 10 of that would go to the engineering, not the implementation.
Okay, so
Everything else is a budgeted line
maybe
item.
not. Okay,
Yeah.
so none of that should need ARPA funds to be completed.
Correct.
Okay.
And we don't even know that the ARPA funds would be needed for the valve vault. We're just wanted to include that if there is a deficiency in the remaining $10,000 that would be left in the budget specific for this project.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about horse trading budgets, which probably doesn't work, but it seems to me that this crossover pipe is really important because it allows us to fill the 1 million gallon without having to turn on the clock tower plant.
Exactly.
And there was a lot of angst at the meeting. Some people seemed to be twitchy about the fact that we had to get the clock tower plant turned on. Well, unless we're really short of water on the upper creek side, operating 2 plants for an operator is a big deal, and it's expensive. And my assessment is that the clock tower plant probably would be best left as a backup plant to be used if we need it. And I think that needs some study. I'm not sure, what all the details are. So my question is that it looks like you'll be a full year into the cycle, even though it's budgeted, before you can get this crossover pipe in place. Is there a possibility to use some of our newfound wealth to move up the project? And that would then, the budget would then, I guess, you'd be over budget, or you'd be under budget, which would be unheard of. So, I mean, is there any way to speed some of these projects up now that we have a little cushion of money?
Yes, so we've talked about that with SGM, and once, if the board approves the engineering and we have the ability to offset funding for any difference in the cost for the implementation and installation, they actually believe that we would be able to get that done this year.
I would support that. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to make sure I understand. You said crossover pipe. Can you just explain that a little more?
The engineering is they have to come out of the upper plant and they have to bore under Bell Creek, which means they have to dam up Bell Creek, and then there's only about 100 feet, 200 feet of pipe. It's not that much digging, really. and there's a couple of valves that are in there, and then we'll be able to shove water directly into the 1 million gallon tank. I think there's also some valve repairs that are not done yet between clock tower and the tank, right? That was on the sanitary survey yet.
I'm sorry, can you say that last part again?
Oh, it's important to be able to get water from upper Lambourne plant to the 1 million gallon storage and not have to run through the plant. That's the point.
Right.
So where are we on this list? Kind of lost track. In the weeds. So staffing, I think we're going to be looking at that. I don't know where that's going to be on the recommendations, but that's something, as we said, we already talked about that. Finished water storage. I think this ties in with the finished water storage, what we're talking about now.
The other highest item, according to the survey, was PRV improvements, aside from staffing. And I think that, from my thinking, this is probably number 2 for me for my own priorities. I think the spring collection system should be tip-top before we really do anything else. But I think that PRV improvements are a matter of safety. It seems like we have some lines that are, if not at their pressure limits, pretty close. And this is exactly the situation that caused the outage in 2019. And so I think that, do you guys agree that this is an important thing? Like, can we make a recommendation perhaps to town to prioritize pressure equalization and associated work?
That is also one of the top priorities recommended by JDS Hydro.
Right.
So I certainly am in favor of it. I think one thing we need to think about, and I was just talking with Corinne before this meeting started, is exactly what this grant can be used for. Corinne, do you want to explain that again? Because it can be used in the production part, but not in the delivery part?
We requested clarification because it talks a lot about drinking water specific, and of course, Phil, you'll know when you think drinking water, we're talking treated water, not raw water. So, so we're looking for confirmation of whether or not the funds can be used for infrastructure specific to the raw water side, or if it only is at plant or in distribution. So.
Comment. I think I read those. They're pretty broad. You can do about anything you want in distribution and production. And probably could do sensors. It seems to me that was kind of wide open, and whether we could use it for wastewater or not, it's unclear. It didn't sound like it. The other thing to think about is whether we can leverage some of this money. It came up at the meeting. Somebody mentioned it. If we identify larger projects, say in the 2023. And I don't know whether you can use any of this money for grant writing or not. Is that possible?
It isn't eligible for matching funds, but one of the other options when we were discussing this, and I mentioned to Tammy as well, and this of course is more specific to the tank lining, but could be a larger grant. The town has started setting aside monies that's specific for the tank lining, whether that be direct payment or as a matching fund. So while we can't use the ARPA funds, we can use those funds that the town has set aside as a matching. So it may reduce the size of grant, but it still offsets, it still increases the amount of money we would have to work with if we were to utilize that money that we have been putting in reserve.
So ARPA does allow us to spend money on engineering, is that correct? No?
I would need to go back and look. It was pretty.
We have to buy stuff, it sounds like.
It really says, it seemed to really be tied to the actual infrastructure, not the planning portion. But I can definitely, we'll just have to go back and look at that again and continue to ask for specific clarification from DOLA with any specific questions that we have.
The document that you sent out, Tammy, does specifically say that sources are included. Rehabilitation of wells or development of eligible sources to replace contaminated sources. So presumably that would be before it's treated.
So I think I would suggest we just move forward assuming that it would be included. Does that sound good?
Probably, yeah. And we can leave it up to the board to really figure it out. We can just say, yeah. What do you guys think about PRVs? We need new ones or no? Do we need new pressure reducing valves?
They're key to the system, so they gotta be a priority. I mean, it's that simple.
Okay.
From the staffing side, we would agree. We have the implementation of a new PRV also budgeted for this year. Apologies, I didn't include that in the list. The only reason we haven't moved forward on that was actually waiting to get some of the feedback from JDS because we didn't want to put it in and then have them come back and say, you know, this would be a better location. So one of the big asks that we did have of them when they were here and when Travis was on site working with them was to look at the location, not just maintenance and updating, but actual location of our vaults and see if they're in the best location or if we can reduce numbers or, you know, by a better placement.
So thus far, PRV is a top priority. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, I move that we recommend to the board that we look into replacing all recommended PRVs from JDS. Or whichever upgrades
Do we have a second on that?
I'll second.
So it seems to me that we're not going to make a list. We're going to just look at each item separately. I kind of like that idea. Just look at each item separately and say, is this something we want to deal with right now?
Right.
Take it to the board and say we want to have this happen right now. Okay?
Sure.
Further discussion on PRVs? Anything from the public? Okay, so a motion to, let me make sure I got this right. I didn't write it down, Thomas. Motion to.
I'm gonna record it as a motion to recommend to the board, town board, to make all PRV repairs recommended by JDS.
Okay, we have a motion to recommend to the board to look into having, oh boy, I'm sorry.
I recommend to the board to make all our PRV repairs recommended by JDS.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And we do have a price on that, an estimated price on that, I believe, don't we? Seems like they had a price per vault. Okay, yeah, I think they do. I think we do.
Yeah, I think.
Where they think the lost water is, the unaccounted for water is going to. Is that correct? Or do you want to explain that, Philip, exactly what that is?
Actually, I'm not sure where this 8-inch line is. Was one reason I would like to get the access codes to the GIS that are internal to give you a live map so we can figure that out. I think JD's, that, did I read, I remember it was 10,000 feet. It's some incredible bunch of, at $20 a foot, you're looking at $2 million.
10,700 linear feet, yes. Now, but that, I'm looking at a 10-inch steel pipe. Is that what we're talking about?
I'm not sure what I had on my notes. Hang on. This is the 8-inch line in the east distribution loop regarding the improvement of fire flows for pressure zone 4, which is Apple Valley and Doris, east end. It's the one that I think John mentioned it breaks routinely. This is the one that
I believe it's it's the
Yeah.
dry gulch, the line that we have that leaks all the time on dry gulch. Travis is a little under the weather, that's why he's not here. I did text him to confirm that.
So that's not the one along the westerly route into town. Let's see. I'm just trying to find where this is in the report, make sure I understand exactly what we're talking about.
Well, I think save some time, that's going to be a huge project in terms of cost. And I think it would be right now pretty far down our list, so I'd suggest that maybe we take it up next time when all of us can have a chance to look at the maps and get our heads around the piping structure up there. It is complex.
Yeah, that's also a lower priority on the survey. I don't know if you want to take those in order of how we voted. The next one would be raw water data collection.
So are we just moving down the
I'm
items
not
as
sure
they
which,
appear in the survey, or, I mean, that's where I am. Oh,
I was
okay.
going in order of the
Okay.
the total results. That's okay. But yeah, it's all kind of.
And apologies, I don't want to jump back, but I did actually hear back from Travis, and that 8-inch that they're talking about is not the dry gulch line. It's the Lambourne line from the 1 million that goes toward the where the $500,000 tank was. So that's the 8-inch steel line they're talking about.
Okay.
Well, that wasn't a huge priority for everyone who voted, so, yeah, do you want to just move to the raw water data collection then?
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can find my my email where I listed them. We had like 5 top topics. What was I?
It was PRV improvements, staffing, PRV improvements
Oh, yeah,
11
there
points,
is.
staffing 11.
Yep.
Raw water data collection 10.
Yeah, so those, yeah, I've got you now. Raw water data collection, identify and repair broken spring lines, and water loss analysis, I think are the remainder of the top 5 topics. And then if anybody has any favorites beyond that, I don't think we're going to have time to go through all 30 of them.
And the raw water data collection, I assume this would require actually fixing up all these springs before we could really understand. Is that, or can you explain raw water data collection?
Well, according to JDS, let's see where the section 9.2 and the recommendations, it was page 54 of the report, section 9.2, under their priorities actually for raw water storage. Number 1 is accounting for raw water inflow and spillages. Knowing what comes into the water treatment plant and what is not is the first step to developing sufficient information to identify whether maximizing the raw water capture of the springs can address water shortage issues or not. And their intention is that a combination of partial flumes and V-notch weirs are recommended for all springs, inflow, and spill locations, and the total cost of implementing this alternative is, they estimate at $50,000. So I think compared to some of the other items on this list, this is lower cost and higher value overall. And in my opinion, until we know how much water's coming off the hill, the rest of the system is operating under guesswork.
So we're talking about the partial flumes, the V-wares, at a cost of about
Let's say
$50,000.
$50,000
Okay, got it.
according to JDS.
Yeah, there's 5 partial flumes up there that could be have electronic flow measurement devices put in them. It's pretty hostile up there in the wintertime. The technology now in flume reading is pretty good, but there's some other pieces involved. That information has to go into a data network of some sort, and that would require some integration probably with Brown Hills controls. And my sense is that we should have Brown Hills, who's my favorite, controls people, do a little mini survey up there and see what they come up with as far as something that is reasonably priced and robust and that will integrate with our data source. We have pretty good data. In other words, we know what's coming out of our plant, and we have a good idea what's going in, and we have a pretty good idea what's being spilled. So these electronic remote stations sound seductive and cool, but they are prone to error. They're prone to a lot of difficulties in a harsh environment. So they would be nice to have, from my perspective. They're not the holy grail of how much water we have. And so my recommendation would be to use some of our Biden money, whoever gave it to us, to do perhaps a $2,000 or $3,000 study. I'd recommend Brown Hills, and get an idea of what we can and cannot do up there on that mountain. I think we'll come up with something, but I would recommend that firsthand.
I don't think we can use that money for this, can you? Can we?
Yeah.
We don't know for sure.
I talked to Chris Lancy. They might be willing to do a relatively inexpensive. I mean, it's not going to be that difficult. It's just going to require somebody's knowledge and skill, and they might be able to provide us something that we could use for not a lot of money. I think we should ask them.
So what you're saying is have Browns do this analysis before we consider putting in the V-wares partial flumes, or?
I'm a big fan of having a plan before you throw money at something.
Do you want to make a motion to that effect?
Well, I would move that as one of our recommendations, we ask Chris Lancy from Brown Hills Controls to make a site visit and advise the committee on possible strategies for remote monitoring of our springs.
Could you repeat that, please? I'm trying to write it down.
Simply, I would move that we ask Chris Lancy of Brown Hills Controls to perform a site visit and advise the Water Advisory Committee on possible strategies for remote monitoring of our springs.
Okay, we have a motion to recommend to the board that we ask Chris Lancy with Brown Hill Controls to perform a site visit, and this is to the springs, is that correct? Right. To advise the water committee on remote monitoring of the springs. Do we have a second?
Is he going to do this for free, do you think?
I suspect he might. That was this is the discussion part of the motion. Corinne, if we had to spend $1,000, would we have it, or would that break us? Or?
That wouldn't break us. I think we could maneuver things and make that happen.
Chris Lancy's not my brother, but Chris has done a lot of work on our SCADA system on the clock tower plant, and I think they would provide the analysis with a good idea. They'd probably get the work at the end of the day. So, anyhow.
I have a question. I don't know. Are we just going to have them look at how the spring gets into the first pipes? Or are we going to have them look at how the system comes together? I don't know how the system is now. If there's a pipe for each spring that goes all the way to the main pipe, or if there's several springs come together and that goes into one pipe. But are there pipes that lead from the spring to major pipe, and then a minor pipe, then several minor pipes that lead to the major pipe? And if it's a multi-tiered thing, I think we should get someone to look at each one of the tiers, because if all they're looking at is from the spring through the first pipe, if there's multiple tiers of pipes, we might not get enough information to know.
So part of the mapping that SGM is going to be doing with Travis in the next week or so is exactly that. That would then we'd have the mapping to show all the different sites, because you're right, the town owns water rights on 33 springs. Not all 33 springs are producing springs right now, but we have rights and pipes from 33 springs, and by the time they get to the 1 million and the 2 million, you're talking about 3 pipes. So 33 springs are feeding in eventually to 3 lines that are feeding the plants.
There are already 5 collection points in place. They're partial flumes. They're read usually once a week by the water commissioners. That data is recorded, and it's in the natural resource sector of the state. What we would be doing would be automating that function to where we could look at it every day instead of once a week. It would give us some clues about spring drop-offs and what the hydrodynamics are up there. And I think it's a starting point. And then as we get our maps up and running and we start looking at environmental things, then I think we can get in deep into the weeds in a year or two and see if we can start looking at individual springs. But it's a panoply of straws up there. There's pipes going every which direction on the collection side. So right now I think we're stuck with what we got, and we can automate those for 8,000 or 9,000 a station probably. And it will help us at least give some clues about our raw water supply.
Michael, to answer your question, the JDS proposal has 11 spill metering locations and 6 partial flume locations. So it's, like they said, it's kind of a network, and several galleries come together. But these guys have selected sites that they think are most likely or good for measurement.
So just to be clear, rather than say, okay, we want to recommend to the board, we're going to put in these partial flumes and V-weirs, start measuring the water, you just want to have them look at it, make sure that what we're doing isn't like a waste of time and a waste of money.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think we can, the partial flumes that we have currently 5 or be it 6 are going to be with us for a long time. I mean, that's the historic way of measuring water, and whether we're electronic or not, the water commissioner will jump up and down if we have the ability to remote read, I can tell you that.
So we don't have a second on this, do we?
We're going to take, I'm trying to understand the motion. We're going to take what Thomas just said. This is what we should be looking at. The 2 numbers you just said.
11 and 6.
Yeah, and we're going to look at those and find out the best way to measure the flow in that 2-part system. Okay.
I don't know, Phil, you think that's, is that accurate? You think that's, okay.
I was gonna go a little cheaper, I mean, look at 6.
Well, I mean, let's be realistic. I think we're probably gonna end up with a lot more.
This probably won't happen this year. The other thing we could do is have, Chris would be happy to come here and talk to us by Zoom, and we can challenge him a little more than what I said or anybody else said. So possibly the next meeting we might invite him to come and talk to us, or possibly a Zoom or something, I don't know. If that's more suitable to the committee.
Yeah, I would be in favor of that. Understanding exactly what they would do and exactly what we have for them to do.
So I'll withdraw the motion, and we'll look into having Browns Hills talk to us at the next meeting.
So at this point, that it sounds like that takes the partial flumes, the weirs off the table, for at least until we find out more from Browns Hill. We all okay with that? Okay. And we have a good year to spend this money, is that correct? I mean, it's...
Yeah, we actually have until 2026 to expend. We just have to
Okay.
do our first report by the end of August, just letting them know what our plan is, but we're not tied to it. And then we have an annual reporting obligation.
Okay. Awesome. So the next one on the list then, Thomas, would be the water loss analysis, is that correct? Or the broken spring lines? Broken spring lines.
Yeah, I see broken spring lines next, but I feel like that's, I mean, that kind of is in the same zone as the rest of that process, you know? I don't know. What do you guys think? Is that the same as data collection, or is that a totally separate item?
Personally, I'd see that as a separate item. If we're losing money before, I mean, if we're losing water before it even gets to the plant, then we're losing both water and money. Personally, I think it could be its own
Characteristically,
thing.
water loss analysis in most cases occur on the finished water side, by and large. I mean, we determined that we have roughly 30%, and that's over, I don't know, 4 or 5 different studies over the years. And that's not a bad number. I think you heard the engineer last week say that really is not bad. I mean, the error rate in water meter reading is 10% or 15% itself because of our meter structures. Turbine meters inherently are marginally accurate, and that's what we use. So a water loss analysis would be meshed in most cases with a meter replacement program, which we've talked about in the past, which I understand, Corinne, that the town has had a meter replacement strategy or not. I'm unclear about that.
Yes, the town's substantially replaced the majority of the meters that we read directly. Of course, not the meters that are on the water company side beyond the master meters. We have not a large number, I want to say less than 125 meters that we direct read that are left that need to be replaced, and it is the intention to do a substantial amount of those this year still.
Is that budgeted money, or would we use some of our, is it budgeted for those?
It's both. We have some already in stock that we've been using, and then we budgeted for the additional purchase of some additional meters as well.
Oh, that's great news. The other question is the accuracy. You know, we sell a lot of water through master meters. Mm-hmm. I know the meter at German Creek, for example, because I helped that company out, seems to not be reading correctly. Have we had any of our master meters calibrated?
The ones that the town owns have been calibrated and have been looked at, but the secondary systems, the master meters are owned by the water company. So any work that's been done on that master meter, I don't have any information on that.
Don't you think the town should have a policy that those meters be calibrated perhaps every 3 or 4 years on part of the, I mean, that's, a lot of our water loss could be well related to the master meters.
That is, I would think that would be a good idea. I do have some concern with water loss happening at master meter or beyond master meter that we don't have any data tracking of, yeah.
Because I know for a fact the German Creek doesn't add up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have a pretty good idea what consumptive use is, and that master meter is down in a big hole, and, you know, they're expensive sometimes to calibrate. You have to pull them
Right.
out. And
Right.
so, in terms of an action item that we haven't thought about, I think that a recommendation for us would be, in terms of the water loss analysis, would be focused primarily on meter calibration. I can either add that as a recommendation or just hands. I mean, some of the stuff that we're recommending, you're already thinking about.
Right.
And as long as you're thinking about it, it probably doesn't need to come from us in some, on some shopping list, you know.
Well, there's several different ways that we know that there's water, unaccounted for water that we've been discussing. And again, it always comes down to dollars, but every time you open or pull any water from the hydrants, or the fire department pulls any water from the hydrants, that's not metered water, so that goes into that water loss. We have several locations that are non-bill locations on the town system that use water that still don't have meters installed, and so those are on the list for this year, as well as ones that we want to get meters installed, because the ambulance barn, they are a no-bill location that pulls water, so any water that they're using for maintenance, cleaning, anything for their ambulance, none of that's accounted for. So there are things like that that are the known unaccounted for that we do have on the radar to address.
So I guess when I think of water loss analysis, we'd be looking for leaks. I mean, a lot of that would be looking for leaks. Is that something, what does JDS recommend for water loss analysis? Does anybody have that up? I mean, we're looking at a lot of water loss here, I think, and this was obviously a priority for the people who responded to the survey. So do we need to pin down water loss analysis, what we would want that to be, or?
My understanding is that there's a procedure by, what's his name, John Plumstarns mentioned that AWWA and CDPHE have procedures for finding unaccounted for water. I think it's a matter of going through these steps, or the existing processes. I don't know what those processes are, so I can't really say. But it seems like, I mean, like he indicated, it's not an uncommon problem, and there's a procedure to deal with it. We just need to begin that procedure if we're going to deal with it.
Most of our engineering firms provide services for exactly this kind of stuff. I mean, the question is whether we need another, $5,000 or $7,000 engineering bill to do that. That would be the proper way to do it, and they could make recommendations about calibrating master meters and everything else. The other issue is, I know DOLA has been very active in, they've already given us a pretty good grant this year, but DOLA's been very active in providing small engineering studies for, like, rate analysis, number one. The second would be water loss analysis, because those hinge on efficiency, and they like that stuff. So I think if we could find a way to round up some money, I would probably have SGM or JD or one of those guys get us a cost on what it would take to do a water loss analysis.
I can request those numbers. That's
Okay.
Easy enough.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to circle back to the broken spring lines line item. Corinne, you mentioned that Travis has this as one of his projects. Do you know his process, where he's at, where he expects to be?
I don't know which spring he's working on. I know we budget approximately $30,000 a year for spring line repair. Last year, we replaced over, I want to say close to 1,800 feet of spring line. There's been a few small repairs done this year already. And I know he has another line that he wants to repair, but I don't remember which spring it feeds off of offhand.
Okay. So it sounds like that's something that town's aware of, has budgeted for, and is already dealing with. I don't think that we need to bring that to anybody else's attention at this time.
So does that take us through the whole list? If we've
That's the
gotten-
top ones. If anybody's got any special special babies that they want to discuss, I know that I didn't have email collection, so one person mentioned the legal review of our decrees as an additional topic. So I think that falls under the category of stuff that needs to be figured out on the top side rather than the bottom side. But it's also a bigger ticket kind of a deal.
Corinne, do you want to talk about what Bo saw and all that? And
Yeah,
what we talked
so
about
you probably have all seen it. It's in the Google folder. There's the 2009 decree list. And so I was talking with Bo and I asked him specific about the civil action numbers and if those were usable numbers that we could use those civil action numbers that are tied to the decrees to do a little bit more research on those. And he said yes. He's on vacation right now, so we're going to touch on that when he gets back. He'll be back on the 6th. The other thing is, it predates me exactly, but I have a pretty strong recollection that it hasn't been that long ago. I believe Jim Briscoe was the town attorney when a search and updated information on the water decrees occurred. I've done a cursory search of our electronic records so far. I haven't gone to paper record, and I haven't found any data specific to that. But we also did a quick search in our accounts payable and did find where we had some payouts to Aaron Clay when he was in practice. So we're going to pull those and try to get a timeline on if that was related to any decree research as well. So that's what we're doing on administratively specific to our water decrees.
One thing of interest to me, if there is the call-out structure, I was talking with Travis somewhere along the way, and it just came up in conversation about who, when the call goes on, we lose some of our water, and I asked him where it went, and he told me that he had, for example, a handshake agreement with the Rovers on how they divvied their water up there, and I thought, well, that's very interesting. A handshake agreement, splitting up waters. That's a recipe for somebody getting killed, So I'm curious about the call-out structure, and because that really determines our vulnerabilities at the end of the day. So.
I agree. And so those agreements may be handshake agreements, but they predate Travis. And so there are, and I don't disagree. I'm in no way want to besmirch the, I hate calling things out with things like good old boy system and things, but to be frank, a lot of things that have occurred in history in Paonia were not done and put on paper or weren't even recorded. The number of documents that we still, contract agreements that we come across that are signed and have never been, they're signed, but they've never been recorded. So there's no trackable record when the historical knowledge goes away. Is a big issue for the town, which we're seeing even with the GIS mapping. There wasn't even a full set of maps of the town lines, water lines, sewer lines. Nobody had that. This is institutional knowledge that's in people's brains that we're working on getting on paper. And I would agree with things like that agreements that are long-standing agreements but have never been recorded in some type of fashion need to come before counsel and be recorded if they are agreements that are being held to, so. I know a lot of the agreements, as far as when there's a call on water, those are in writing, but I know there are some specific ones that are longstanding agreements as far as I'm aware.
If I'm not mistaken, we can use some of this, this money for researching water rights. Didn't I read that in the, I mean, if we had to hire, for example, a specific water attorney for the focus of looking at improving our raw water structure, I think that's allowed to use that money in this current.
With specific items like that, what we would do is reach out and confirm what, so they give you those headers of it, you can do it on this, and which one would it fall under? How would, if we were able to do it, where would it go? How would we record it and request, or provide to them proof of the expenditure, because this isn't a reimbursement request grant. So it could be, but we would want to confirm it before we did it.
Okay, I am the chair and I am lost. Where are we in this conversation? What do we need to talk about?
Have we,
I knew this would probably happen because there's
Get out of the
a lot
weeds.
to this, but
Thomas, have we covered the ones that the team said were the most important?
We've covered the top 5. Yes.
What?
The top 5 are staffing, number 1. We have one recommendation of the board to investigate hiring an engineer. We didn't have any motion, I don't think, regarding helping Travis. We have he's got 90 days to produce action items for his new hire, and Corinne mentioned that an additional ORC may be an eventuality. The other high one was PRV improvements. We had a motion to recommend to the board that they investigate JDS recommended improvements. We are going to sit on water data collection for now until we hear back from Brown Hills and what they might be willing to do and when. We are going to sit on identification and repair of broken spring lines, because that's in town's wheelhouse. It sounds like they have action already on that under control. And water loss analysis, we kind of touched on that. I don't know if you guys want to take any specific motions for that, but that was number 5. And then after that, anything, if anybody has any ideas.
if I understand everything correctly, the water loss analysis would be something you're going to look into, just asking them how much that would cost. That would more than likely not be covered under this grant. So it seems to me like, and I knew this wasn't going to be easy, just putting together a list and saying, these are the things we want, because there are a lot of things to think of, and some of these projects can't even be done until other projects are completed. So it seems to me that at this point, if we were to get a recommendation from Browns Hill and be able to install some V-weirs, partial flumes, clean up some of those areas where the water at the springs, that we would be close to spending what we could spend in the first year. But we just can't, at this point, know that we can do these projects.
So I would think that, so then I guess it becomes cart before the horse a little bit, because my question is then, that they seem to be two different topics. One, we've got this ARPA money that's come in, which is great and can be used for water, for infrastructure. But then second, we have our infrastructure analysis, which was ultimately just giving you, the advisory water committee was going to give the board recommendations on some priorities to be looking at, but not necessarily that those priorities would have to be fully funded through the ARPA money. So I mean, I know they can be intertwined, but they also are bigger than just the ARPA funds, because the costs associated with the top 5 substantially go above and beyond the total funds that we're going to receive through the ARPA.
I think we can pretty clearly define mission critical things right off the bat. What I call the crossover project, really, in order to fund our million-gallon, has to be done as soon as possible. I think the PRV analysis is essential, right off the bat. And probably water loss analysis at some point would be interesting. I mean, we're not really out in the weeds on that one right now. 30% is really not bad. I've seen 60, 70, 80% losses.
Right.
So I think we would slow down. We'd maybe try and find an engineering firm that could do that for us. I think it's important. I think calibrating these master meters is essential, and there may be some costs associated with that we could use some of this ARPA money for. I'm not sure. So that's item number 3. The rest of another mission critical is to line the tank. We're under the gun. From we'll get an EO if we don't, and that's hugely expensive, probably $500,000.
Yes.
Right. And so that's mission critical. So we've already defined 5 things right now that will take us a year and a half to get done, and a significant amount of money.
Right.
The rest of the things we talk about, mission, planning, remote monitoring, those are all nice things that should be put in a long-range plan at some point. So that would be my sense of where to go. I mean, we have 5 things that we can give the board right now.
And just based again on the brief reading of your document that you gave us, it indicates that rehabilitation, replacement, or installation of pipes to improve water pressure to safe levels or to prevent contamination caused by leaky or broken pipes. Sounds like that might be included in water loss control measures. So that money may be available for those loss control as well.
Mike just said, I think we've accomplished our goal for the evening. I think we made more headway than I thought we had, especially after your list, Philip. That's so I will put together something for the board packet. Thomas, if you could send me your minutes when you get them done. There's no hurry. We do have another 2 weeks before we have our next meeting, which is really nice. Sure. Any other thoughts? And any other thoughts from the committee? And does anybody from the public? We still have 10 minutes. We can have a meeting.
So, sorry I couldn't arrive at time, but my name is Marta Sanchez, and I have been writing to you some emails. I know that you are trying to solve immediately problems. I would like to share with you some ideas that I have. And if you can consider, I wrote this letter and I would like to read it. I'm not sure if this is something that is necessary to consider in a long term. But I would like to share with you. I didn't have the chance to meet you. I know your names, but I didn't get any reply from you. So I know that you are so busy. So if you allow me to read this. So,
Marta,
yeah,
about how long is the letter?
3 minutes, 2 minutes.
Okay,
It's just this.
great, thank you.
Okay. So, dear Peonia leaders, I want to emphasize that sometimes the urgency does not allow us to see the important. And in order to go further, sometimes we need to take a moment back and ponder different perspective, do the kind of deepness of the challenges we are facing today. Having in mind the children of our children in Peonia and our intention to give a sustainable and healthy place where they can live and thrive in the future, and for the benefit of all, we highly encourage you to review the scientific study called Water for the Recovery of the Climate, a new water paradigm that I sent it to you by email, and I can attach it, and the videos also, which will open a major comprehension in order to find long-term solutions and certainly support the resolutions you need to take about Peonia water right now. This study fit tremendously with the GDS hydro report, which I read, by answering many of the questions and challenges presented here. According with the draft, several million of dollars are required to solve some of the basic problems. On the other hand, I would like to present that applying a new water retention system could be way cheaper. The system has been executed in many countries, including the US, as lower cost and higher yields when compared with traditional solutions. It's a design that mimic nature and produced that landscape, flora, fauna, food supply, and communities thrive by bringing back water sources and mainly recovering the natural hydrological cycle of water. We as a collective want to consider long-term solutions. It's absolutely possible when we work in conjunction with Mother Nature. Piping water or build conventional dams never has been a great solution. It is bread for today, hunger for tomorrow. Dry the landscape, kill the vegetation, and cause more drought, thus eliminate communities. There are thousands of cases that show this result everywhere in the world. We need to have an integral point of view. In the last decade, proved solutions are coming from outside of the traditional way of thinking, since, as we see for the last 100 years in almost all culture, except some of the native ones, we rarely have found long-term and sustainable solutions good enough for the ecosystem and for the people of the planet. We really have got worse and worse in all areas of our life, depleting our home, Mother Nature, and thus our lives. However, Peonia still could be able for a reasonable and wise acquisition of applied knowledge, showing the way of respect, appreciation, care, working in conjunction with Gaia and her resources, having in exchange a win-win-win result for all parts involved. This is the kind of work we want to be committed. We really appreciate your work and time and for considering this data. Thank you. This is a 100-page study that answered many of the GDS hydro report question and challenging. So if you have questions in the future, I would love to commit with you and show you more. And I send you by email many links with very short videos and the study.
Okay, and we have received those emails, and I know we have at least one member who is interested in looking more into this. I certainly am. Time is
Yeah, I
obviously
would
a
love to meet you
hard factor.
later.
It's nice to meet
Okay.
you.
Nice to meet you.
So we appreciate you coming here tonight,
Mhm.
and we look forward to more discussions in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marta.
Nice to meet you.
Tammy, may I,
Yes.
say something? Thank you for speaking, Marta, and I did watch some of your videos. I appreciate your enthusiasm, and I think that there's merit to the concepts and the ideas that you're presenting. The work, the scope of work of those projects are well outside what our committee can do. It's like much, not only like our influence in town versus the region, you know, and the type of project that you're considering is a regional kind of a project, you know, something that's like a reservoir system that is a part of the landscape, you know, where you're building the earth, you know, is something that's well outside our capabilities. These 4, 5, 6 people, and in the JDS report, there were some locations that they mentioned. Actually, really, there are 3 suitable locations for reservoir style systems that can feed this town. That's Lone Cabin, Todd Reservoir, and Robert Reservoir are the only 3 available to us. And those have issues if we do utilize them for raw water storage. Each of them has issues associated with the logistics of how that happens, and then also the logistics of dealing with the water and bringing it into town. So don't give up. Don't be discouraged by our non-responses. I think that we're listening. Yeah, and I apologize for not writing back to you, but you have to realize that this is a much larger project than anything that we can do here. It's something you have to interest the entire community in, you know.
In the long term. So be in contact and explore, because I many things that I don't know. So now I would like to know and explore how certain things can be done and make it sizable to these. Because it's not just like a huge project, it can be small, medium, large. And according with the data that I have in terms of cost, it's way less than the GDS post there. Okay, so, but I would like to be in conversation with you about this. So I would love it when you have time. Okay, thank you.
Don't run away. Have you talked to the Colorado River District? It's in Glenwood Springs. You might want to talk to them about this too, because one of the things they often consider is putting a reservoir in for various reasons. And they might find the stuff that you have of interest.
Colorado, what did you say?
I'm sorry, Colorado River District.
River District.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dave Kanzer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, don't ask me how to spell that. I can say it, but
Mm-hmm.
is an engineer there that I've worked projects with, and he might be a place to start.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but I live in Peonia.
Pardon?
But I live in Peonia.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, but I am grateful for that, because it's something to start.
You can start by email.
Mm-hmm.
Just look up the Colorado River District and
Mm-hmm. Okay.
find out.
And Dave Kanzer was just interviewed on KBNF, so
Okay. But I would love to meet you, Tammy, when you have time. Thank you.
It is 6:31. I am calling this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. What? Did you want to talk? You didn't raise your hand, so I assumed, okay. Sure.
It's okay. Say your two things. I'll repeat them.
Repeat her question? So you're asking if the standard operating procedures exist beyond the manuals that you reviewed, which are what you reviewed, what you requested was in your Cora was the standard operating procedures, and through CDPHE and the engineering firms, that is what's recognized as the standard operating procedures for the filter tech and the pulse systems. So I think what you're actually looking for is more of just a steps checklist that an individual could follow if they needed to step into a position temporarily and follow a steps checklist procedure. And whether or not it's drilled down to that level beyond the specific sections of those, I couldn't answer that question, but I would be happy to ask that question and follow up on how they would handle that type of a situation if the specific person that does that job was incapacitated or unavailable to do it. What do you mean? That I would follow up on? Well, I would go to our Public Works Director specific to the water and sewer plant. If it was a steps checklist for anything that was internal, it would depend on who was overseeing that. If it was finance, the steps checklist, of course, I would get from Cindy. But specific to water and sewer, it would be Travis. Mm-hmm. That would cover the Public Works, which is the water, sewer, trash service, maintenance, parks, streets. He would oversee any of that. Yeah. For me to ask him if he has a drilled down version of the procedures, no. No, you don't. I will ask him how he addresses that and provide that information to you.
I have a question. I operate water treatment plants, and I have 3 or 4 of them that I actually operate. Now, what you're asking for is essentially an idiot's manual to how to operate a very complicated system. And my question is, those of us that operate plants train people to do that. And if you have an occasion to see the video that's been made of that plant up there, you'll be blown away by the complexity and what goes on. So the question is, I mean, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with that information? I mean, we already have it.
Personally, to
Oh, yes, it is.
be, no,
You're-
it's not
you're
like I'm
pounding-
gonna
You're
make
pounding
a,
our staff here for a bunch of information that we use internally already. I mean, as operators, we train people. If that plant goes down, we're not going to go to the idiot's manual. We're
How
going to go
many-
to
how
the
many
manual that says
operator-
how to turn
how
on the
many-
filters.
how many qualified operators are there in town at this moment?
Well, we have Travis and the trainee. Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, we're talking about the town of Paonia. It doesn't matter how many operators are around. So, I mean, my sense is that what you're requesting is a nuisance. I mean, what are you going to do with the information?
I want to know.
Okay, I would like to stop right there. Thank you. Two things. One is I'm going back to the after action report after the water line breaks. That was something recommended in that after action report, that there be standard operating procedures for emergencies such as this. And I think that's what you're looking for, correct? Okay. 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 How about if I take that to the Public Works Committee and see what we can find out, okay? Would that work for you? Please? For now?
And
Okay, thank you.
And like I said, I plan to follow up on that as well. But for clarification, the SOP for emergency situation is not the same. So that was actually specific to what the steps would be that we would take if there was another situation, another emergency situation. And the plants did not, when the emergency happened and we were dealing with a lot of things, the plants did not shut down because Travis was at a week-long training in Denver. He wasn't on vacation. He was doing required continued education. What Phil's talking about is the boots on the ground knowledge, and it's some of what I was talking about earlier as well. A lot of the knowledge is institutional. That's not just for water and sewer. We're not just talking about those places. There's a lot of institutional knowledge just from doing in finance, in my job, in the clerk's job, that have never been quantified on paper so that someone could step in if there was an emergency. And it's something we talk about a lot and are working on starting to write down when we do something, slowing down for a minute and writing the steps that we take so someone else can step in absence. I don't disagree.
So
Let's stop with the
Should-
back and forth, please. We're going to stop
okay.
with the back and forth now, please. Thank you. Does anybody, if you want to speak now, I would like to end this meeting because we're not getting anything done here. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand.
I'd like to speak
Thomas?
briefly about
Thank you.
standard operating procedures, just to let everybody know that if you look at the JDS Hydro Report, Appendix I is a list of SOPs that they would like to see. Thanks.
Corinne.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening. They were working fine. Sorry about that. So we are working on the details so that he can come and give some additional information to the board on the procedure. But we did qualify, and that is for rates, water, and sewer.
That's good news. Anybody else? Suzanne? Okay, thanks.
So you're talking about putting electronic metering at the springs, and it would benefit the state water, what was it, engineer? water commissioner. Is there any state contribution to something like that if we make his job easier? Is it just good for them? Paonia was able to spend a lot of money, or would they contribute? Or do they have programs where they will contribute if we make their job easier?
I've done a couple of these programs, one on the Overland Ditch. To answer your question, yes, sometimes, but that money comes through the Department of Natural Resources. It's a whole different organization, the guys that manage surface water. So we would certainly ask them about what style and types of measurement devices they like. There might be some money available because, you know, it's for Luke Reschke, yeah, for him to go up there, it takes a full day to get up there and read the meters. So certainly, and a project manager on this would ask all those questions and look around and try and find some money.
Okay, thank you.
So.
Anybody else? Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for being here tonight.